Hello and welcome to my brand new podcast. My name is Ramon June Zerudo, a news blogger from California, USA. Since 2016, I have been writing news commentaries from a biblical Christian worldview on featured news stories from different sources and posting them on my blog site called zednewsblog.com. To be clear, I am not a theologian nor an authority on matters of religion. Borrowing from the terminology of famed British writer C.S. Lewis, I would describe myself as a mere Christian. The purpose of this podcast is the same as that of my blog site, and that is to draw attention to life-changing biblical lessons that can be derived from the featured news story. The main difference between the two platforms is that in the blog site, my commentaries, which I caption my take, usually take just a minute or two to read, leaving no time to elaborate on the suggested lessons, while on the other hand, I have more time and space to disseminate the same subject here in this podcast. On top of that, I have the luxury of being able to use various tools in the podcast for purposes of delivering the message much more effectively. In addition to that, is the opportunity to interact with occasional guests in future episodes that I plan to do. So, let's get on with it then. The title of this episode, the first ever, is The World at War. If you have been watching the news lately, as I hope you have, you know that the world is, once again, at war. But no, not the kind of war that occurred in the 1940s, which was violent, bloody, and altogether horrific. I'm talking about World War II. This time around, the war does not involve guns, tanks, bullets, and ammunition, not the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, nor the Marines. It is nonetheless still a war, but one that I would call a soft war. It's a war that is strictly only about money, an economic war, if you will, a trade war to be precise. The kind of war that affects every citizen's pocketbook and every involved country's political, social, and economic well-being. We are already seeing some of the predictable repercussions arising from this type of conflict. For one, the stock market has been on a very wild up and down swing since the last several days, couple of weeks at least. For another, China is fighting vigorously back at the US, and for still another, some 90 countries and counting are scrambling to make deals with the Trump administration. That's without mentioning the almost immediate closing of some factories and shops and the laying off of workers in China. Now, get this. In retaliation, without notice, last Sunday, April 21st, a Chinese airline suddenly returned 3 Boeing 737 MAX 8 jets back to Seattle, Washington, where they were built and ordered from. According to an aviation consultancy, each of those aircraft cost about $55 million. And that's before factoring in the applicable tariff rates, whatever those may be at the time of importation. The answer to the question that everybody is asking, where will it all lead to, is anybody's guess. As everybody knows, the ongoing trade war that we are witnessing today is figuratively instigated last April 2, 2025 by no less than the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump. Figuratively, I say, because it did not require an act of Congress to declare. He simply announced that effective that day, April 2nd, which he called Liberation Day, all nations that do business with the U.S. will have to pay at least 10% tariff on its exports to the country. But why? What was his reason for it? Well, let's take a look. Here's my take. First of all, President Trump promised during the last presidential campaign that if he wins back the White House, he would lead America to its golden age. By that, Trump meant an unprecedented economic prosperity, the likes of which the world has never seen. But that also means that in order to accomplish his goals, he must be able to find sources of massive amounts of money that would spur his Golden Age plan without raising taxes. So for that purpose, he identified two main sources. Number one, savings from dismantling, cutting, and eliminating wasteful and unnecessary federal programs, projects, and initiatives. And two, generating huge amounts of revenue from increased tariffs. It is estimated that both initiatives would generate upwards of $5 trillion in 10 years. Now, he's not going to remain in office that long, of course, but a good chunk of that money is expected to flow in within the next 4 years. I think it is safe to speculate that he intends to apply a huge portion of it towards reducing the national debt. He'd better. And why not? Such historic event, should it materialize, will trigger massive new investments into the U.S. economy and catapult it to an even higher level of economic development. In addition to the amazement of everyone, foe and friend alike, with the incredible help of a genius named Elon Musk, within just the first 2 months of his presidency, Trump has already identified and quantified over $150 billion and still growing amount of government savings through the efforts of Musk's DOGE, D-O-G-E, or Department of Government Efficiency. With Musk's 2 years job appointment, well, you can do the math in order to determine what his efforts will amount to literally. I figure that will be in the $2 trillion range. Now, let's talk about the matter of tariffs. I would assume that everybody knows that tariffs are what the importers pay the government when importing goods from another country. Tariffs are a form of taxation, a real and cold cash revenue. In simplistic terms, low tariffs mean comparatively low prices for commodities, and high tariffs mean high prices. By extension, higher prices would lead to a lower demand for a product, and if the demand for that product gets even lower, it could inevitably cause a downturn in production. Eventually, that translates into loss of jobs, and the rest of the negative impact will trickle down to the other sectors of the economy. President Trump obviously knows what he's doing, and I would assume he anticipated already what the possible consequences his decision would create. Although Economics 101 teaches that an unwelcome tariff increase would invariably trigger retaliatory actions on the part of a targeted country, President Trump must have a very compelling reason or reasons for his bold executive decision. In other words, Trump believes the new tariff rates that he has just imposed and additions he will yet impose, depending on the outcome of those ongoing deals with individual countries, are justifiable. Or are they? Well, I for one believe so. You see, for several decades now, beginning in 1947, the United States has been at the losing end of an imbalanced trade flow, due mainly to an established multilateral treaty named General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT, G-A-T-T. The objective of the agreement was, quote, to promote international trade by reducing or eliminating trade barriers such as tariffs and quotas, unquote. The intention was to facilitate economic recovery after World War II. In 1955, however, GATT was replaced by an agency called United Nations Trade and Development, UNCTAD, UNCTAD, which in turn was succeeded in 1995 by the World Trade Organization, WTO. Under the original GATT agreement that the WTO continues to adhere to, countries such as China enjoyed over the years its classification as an MFN, or most favored nation. As such, it was favored with the imposition of only 2% tariff or levy on its imports from the United States, whereas the US had to pay at least 33% on its imports from China. As a consequence of this war, within just a very short period of less than 3 weeks, these numbers have shockingly gone up to as high as 145% going against China's favor and 125% against the United States. Incredible. But since it is an ongoing contest, the currently proposed figures are fluid and could change any day. Historically speaking, before these dramatic developments of late, although many people lamented the negative implications of the WTO's imposed tariff rates, nobody could do anything about it. The WTO being such a powerful and influential international legislative body that seemed to be working against the United States. Many people, including the likes of Nancy Pelosi, have been complaining about it. Until Trump came along, America tolerated the lopsided affair because of its desire to help developing countries. It is a benevolent country after all. And it's not just China. Europe is another issue for the Americans. Case in point, in 2018, not too long ago, Europe exported a total of 1.1 million cars to the United States, Mercedes-Benz, BMWs, Volvos, Jaguars, and the like, worth $43 billion. But the US managed to ship just a little over 267,000 cars to Europe. That is worth just $6.3 billion by comparison. Again, thanks or no thanks, in great measure to the WTO, this is due to Europe's low tariff of 2.5% against US's 10%. As a result of what has gone on for so long, with all its complexities, the overall manufacturing industry in the United States suffered while the other countries enjoyed dramatic growth, with much of the benefits coming from the most lucrative market of all. Who else? The United States. So, according to Trump, the present conditions have changed so much and are a far cry from what they were in the 1960s through the 70s and the 80s. China, for one, is no longer the poor country that it once was. In fact, thanks to the US provision and infusion of capital, technology, and above all, market for Chinese affordable products, it now ironically rivals the United States for world dominance. So, the president claims the time has come to level the playing field. Hence Trump's cry for liberation. Liberation not only from the shackles of outdated and unjustifiable trade agreements per WTO, but liberation also from the unchecked, unfair trade practices perpetuated by China with their dumping, rerouting, and rebranding schemes. Cheating is how some observers characterize it. Oh, I know the analysis can get very complicated. So I guess for now, I think we'll just have to leave it at that. Although I'm sure you will agree that the topic about tariffs is obviously a good study for everyone. there is an important matter in the news item referenced to in my commentary in my blog site that we simply cannot ignore or overlook. That is the implications of the concept of liberation. And when we talk of liberation, three types come to my mind: political, social, and spiritual. My focus, obviously, is on the third kind. That is why, for that reason, please be informed that liberation per se will be the subject of the next episode. Consequently, we will talk at the time about the relevant and applicable biblical principles that I alluded to earlier in connection with that subject. So I hope to see you again then. For now, thank you and God bless.